This morning's Breakfast Bible Bite begins in Psalm 69, verses 22 and 23, where we see the fate of those who remain unredeemed. Verse 22 of 69 reads, "May their table before them become a snare. When they are in peace, may it become a trap." While we were given some keen insights through the messianic prophecies in the psalm, it seems to take a turn now in the next few verses. At least it becomes a bit more akin to the attitudes and principles of those who are still under the severe spirit of the law, keeping in mind that the principles that form the law are still true, only we have been freed from the penalty of the law through the propitiation of Christ. Apparently, we could view these verses as predictions of the recompense that will befall those who refuse to receive Jesus as Lord and Savior, for they remain under the penalty of the law. In support of this consideration, these verses were quoted as applicable by both Paul and Jesus himself. For instance, we read in Matthew 23, 27 through 28, where Jesus confronted the religious leaders who thought they could return to their former way of self-indulgent religious hypocrisy and would have achieved peace by putting this firebrand rabble-rouser to death. Jesus said to them in verse 27, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs who appeared beautiful on the outside, but instead are full of dead men's bones and every impurity. In the same way, on the outside, you seemed righteous to people, but inside you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." Their misattributed fear was that the Romans would remove their authority if they failed to quell this troublemaker. However, their real fear should have been of God, that they purported to represent, and the table of indulgence became a snare. The Apostle Paul, having been a persecutor of the way before he came to Christ, understood the snare of religiosity and the inability of the religious leaders who were caught up in their own importance. They did not accept the prophetic truths from their own scrolls. Neither did they embrace Jesus as Messiah. Therefore, he writes in Romans 11, 9 through 11, about the unconverted Israelites who are trapped in the familiarity of the old way, holding on to so tightly that they lost what they had hoped to gain. David says, "Let their feasting become a snare and a trap, a pitfall and a retribution to them. Let their eyes be darkened so they cannot see, and their backs bent continuously." I ask then, have they stumbled in order to fall? Absolutely not. On the contrary, by their stumbling, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel jealous. The table is so much more than a place for eating. It is a place for conversation, transacting business, entertaining games, and computer interactions. For those who are followers of Christ, the table can be a spiritual blessing centered on the Christ-like nature of Jesus. But for those that are not, it can become a synagogue of Satan, a piece of temptation, overindulgence, scheming, and gossip, a citadel for the synagogue of Satan, espousing the doctrines of demons. Verse 23 of 69 reads, "May their eyes grow dim so that they cannot see, and make their loins shake continually." Verse 23 sets the results of those who choose to remain ensnared. Their eyes become dim and they shake with worry and uncertainty. We read about this in John 3, 18 through 19. "Anyone who believes in him is not condemned, but anyone who does not believe is already condemned because he has not believed in the name of the one and only Son of God. This then is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil." The prophet Isaiah, who speaks for God, writes in Isaiah 5:20, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Because the unbeliever chooses to remain in the familiarity of darkness rather than embrace the light, they have chosen their own future destiny. The Apostle Paul goes on to tell us in Ephesians 4:18, their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life of God who gives life because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against him. Jesus offered the way out in John 8:12. Then Jesus spoke again to them. I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. With no hope for the future, and blinded by the inconsistent ways of the world, the natural-born man becomes unstable, unable to walk firmly without tottering with each and every step. Their loins shake continually under the heavy burden of avarice groveling, confronted daily by the fickleness of human justice. Those who continue to walk in darkness become like paralyzed men. Those who choose not to see will remain in darkness, failing to walk in the righteousness, and they would be unable to even do so. We read in confirmation of this in Romans 8:3-6. What the law could not do since it was limited by the flesh, God did. He condemned sin in the flesh by sending his own Son in flesh like ours, under sin's dominion and as a sin offering, in order that the law's requirements would be accomplished in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh think about the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit about the things of the Spirit. For the mindset of the flesh is death, but the mindset of the Spirit is life and peace.